First of all, welcome. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to show up for this workshop. So this is part of the Make Yourself Workshop series, which is a series of 8 workshops that we're holding here at the library. Can we still see what I got back there? Cool. At the bookstore, and we are covering retouching your images in Photoshop today, and I'm burying the lead here, so let me go ahead and move that. Perfect. Cool. All right. So how many of us have used Photoshop before? Cool. So a lot of us are new? Great. Cool. So you should feel right at home in either place. Whenever I talk Photoshop, one of the most intimidating things, people find intimidating anyway, is the interface of Photoshop. There's a lot of buttons, there's a lot of places to look. It feels like it can be hard to navigate. So we're going to start by just doing some navigation so that we all kind of feel comfortable with where everything is in the space and where you'll typically look for stuff, and then we'll kind of jump into doing some retouching. And then we're going to get super fancy. We're going to talk about masks and how to manipulate them. And then we're going to kind of round out the discussion by talking about how we can use adjustment layers to enhance our photos. Does that sound like an okay game plan? Cool. Sweet. Like I said, I will be around afterwards if there are like extended questions and things like that. So know that I will do my best to help answer your questions as we go. Cool. All right. So when you launch Photoshop, typically you're presented with this new document window. Inside of this new document window, you can pick all sorts of different formats and sizes and stuff like that. These formats and sizes are the artboards that you work on, so like the size of the actual output that you're going to have. These are changeable on the fly. They can be set for to view on the web or for print. You have a bunch of different presets up here that can be super helpful to get you going. But whenever you go into one of these menus here, you have this preset section. And here we can set height, width, orientation, so portrait or landscape, our resolution, standard rule of thumb, 300 is really good for print, 72 is typically the standard for web and video. And that's just like the pixels per inch. So 72. So for web and video, 72. This is general. There are definitely more specific things for more specific styles of print jobs, but 300 for print. Cool. And higher resolutions typically going to yield a bigger file. That type of stuff. We can create presets and name them here. We have different measurements for inches, centimeters, millimeters, points, picas. So whatever your output is. So if you're working with a printer or somebody on the web and they're like, we need these specific values, you can basically start your document with those values locked in so that you know that the output size is the right one for the project. If you don't know any of that, totally changeable on the fly. No big deal. Cool. All right, so we're going to go ahead and we're not going to create anything here because I already have some documents open, but it is a click and drag interface. You can just drag content in from your Finder or Windows Explorer menu. But once you open a project, it will look something like this. So on the left-hand side, we have our tools panel here. In Photoshop, one of the neater things about Photoshop is that when we hover over a tool, it will give us a little video that shows you what the tool does. So if you're unfamiliar with a tool, it's a real easy way to kind of see what it's built for. And they're pretty neat and super easy to take a look at, and they're available whenever you hover over the tool in modern versions of Photoshop. I haven't played with that, honestly. Like I haven't manipulated that, but I'm happy to help you look afterward. If you're on like a current version of Photoshop, it should be the default. I'll bet there's a setting that we can adjust. A lot of tools, especially in this view, will have tools nested underneath them. So you'll notice that if I come down here to my shape tool and I click and hold, I'll see a variety of other tools that are available to me as well. So and I'll zoom in a little bit here. This little notch right here is indicative that there are additional tools nested underneath. So if you're trying to make a shape and all you see is this rounded rectangle tool, if you click and hold on it, you'll find your ellipse tool, your polygon tool, your line tool, all the different tools that are available to you. So different tools have different functions, and they have little videos to kind of show you, and we'll go over some of them today, but your tools panel is on the left-hand side typically. Okay? So on our right-hand side over here, we have our properties panel. And here we'll be able to see adjustments based off of what we select. And as we start working with different tools like adjustments later, you'll find that your adjustment properties will be here, and all the variables and sliders will typically be on that right-hand side. If you're on a different layout than mine, the menu may pop out on the right and stand like a free-floating window. Totally fine, but know that they're going to typically exist on the right-hand side. And then probably the most important thing about Photoshop is the layer system, because really that's most of the reason why we use Photoshop, is that it's a layer-based editing system. So I have this lovely picture here, and if you've used the tutorial in Photoshop before, you've seen this, but I think it's a really good illustration. So we have all these different layers here. We have these little eyeballs. These eyeballs are going to hide and show our layers. So I'll just kind of peel the onion back, if you will. So kind of work through, and you'll see that all of these are stacked up on top of each other in order to create kind of our final image. And there's nothing at all. So building up from the bottom up, these different layers adjust different properties. And these layers are changeable on the fly. So I have this astronaut right here that's sitting outside, right? I want him in the bedroom, super easy. I click on the layer right here, click and drag up, let go, and he's in the bedroom. So that's the way so the upmost layer on top is going to be the one that you see first. So think of it like if you've ever used like that transparent projector paper before, like that you used to put on the thing. As you stack that up, it just works in layers like that. So whatever order you set it in is the order that you're going to see it in. Cool. Make sense? Awesome. If you guys have other analogies for that one, I am taking suggestions. So, also these layers are really easy to move too before we move on. So I have this astronaut right here. I want to make sure I have the right tool selected. If I had to give you two keyboard shortcuts to remember, it's V and spacebar. V is going to take you back to your selection tool, which is the standard tool for Photoshop. V will basically give you this little arrow again. And then when you have that arrow, you can click and drag to move stuff around. Cool. Awesome. Sweet. All right, and we'll get into spacebar in a minute. But feeling okay so far? All right, so now that we've talked about interface, let's talk about retouching some photos. All right, so I'm going to move on to my next Photoshop document here. So Photoshop has a lot of tools for retouching photos. Most of them live in this panel over here. If you look over here, looks like a little Band-Aid. We're going to be focusing on the spot brush healing tool because it's super simple to use and it's pretty powerful. We'll play with some other tools too, but if I click and hold, I'll see the healing brush tool, the patch tool, the content aware move tool, and then the red eye tool. All things to kind of fix your photos. I'll bet you can guess what the red eye tool does. Okay. So one of the coolest things about the spot heal, how many of us have been with Photoshop for a while? So back in the olden days of Photoshop, before the spot healing brush tool, you had to select the source for what you wanted to replace, and then basically just make adjustments every time that you wanted to move stuff, so that, because really it was just kind of grabbing from another part of the image. What Photoshop does now is it uses the same idea, but it's way better at generating stuff on its own. I don't have to give it a reference point if I'm using the spot healing brush tool, which is why it's one of my favorite tools, especially for as like a general purpose healing tool. It's pretty great. So in this image right here, it's a pretty cool image, but she's got a bunch of splotches on her shirt. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here. A couple different ways to do that. We have the zoom tool over here. You can click on that or hit the Z key and then zoom in, which is fine. But it makes me have to come back and switch tools. I'm not a big fan of that. There is a way to do this without ever changing the tool that you're currently in, and I like that way more. Question? Oh yeah, so that's a great question. So when I talk about keyboard commands and things like that, I will identify if there's alternate keys you have to press. Yeah, so Z is just standard zoom. Yeah, I'll say Command or Control. Absolutely, and I'm about to do that right now. I love it. Cool. So if I want to zoom in my opinion, I'm a big like trackpad mouse guy. So for me, on a Windows machine, it's Alt. On your Mac, it's an Option. If I Option, then Scroll, I will zoom in and zoom out. Real easy to do. And then I talked about spacebar being my second favorite keyboard command. That gives you the pan tool. It shows a hand and allows you to move around the image by clicking and dragging. Because you're going to be, in Photoshop, when you're doing a lot of work, you're going to be zooming in and zooming out a whole lot, typically. So this is just an easy way to move around. Option or Alt scroll to zoom in and out. Scroll forward to zoom in, scroll out to zoom out. If your thing is backwards, it will be backwards, however you work. And then hold down the space bar, gives you the hand tool, and that allows you to pan across an image. You'll see the hand there, click and drag and move around. But I never leave the tool I had selected. And that to me is speed. When I don't have to change, when I don't have to move my mouse, I move faster typically. Cool. So next up, let's talk a little bit about the spot healing brush tool. So the spot healing brush tool, there's a reason the word brush is in it, because the spot healing tool is a brush. And brushes are one of the key ways to manipulate photos inside of Photoshop. So brushes have sizes. Up on top on our tool panel up here, if I click on this guy, I will see a bunch of different options for my brush sizes. I can increase and decrease the brush size right there just by clicking and dragging. I can increase or decrease hardness. So kind of how hard I'm pushing down the brush. Think of this like a physical brush. We're literally making choices about the width of the brush and how hard we're pushing down. And then spacing and things like that. Typically the thing you're manipulating the most is going to be size. And again, I had to move my mouse over here to do this. So in my opinion, there is a faster way to get brush sizes down. So if you have a standard QWERTY keyboard, if you look next to the P, you will find brackets. Bracket left and bracket right. Bracket left, if I do it right, let's see. When nothing is selected, we'll make that brush size smaller. You'll see it's physically getting smaller on my screen. Bracket right will make it bigger. So as I'm going through and I'm using this healing brush, I'm going to want to adjust the size of my brush to make sense for the thing I'm trying to fix. I'll show you that right now. So I'm going to go ahead and make this a little bit smaller. I want to go ahead and get rid of this. See, it's a relatively complex pattern. Let's see how we do. Not bad. Cool. Come down here. Got this little guy, it's a little smaller. Not bad. Get this guy just a little bit bigger. And you'll see it's doing a pretty good job keeping up with like the changes and stuff like that. But those are all straight. What do we do when it's not? So let's try over here. Again, make the brush kind of the size that you want. Cool. Not bad. Boom, boom. Rinse, repeat. Cool. How are we feeling so far? Spot healing brush tool, super easy to use. Literally, zoom in on what you want. Choose the paintbrush size you want. Click and drag to paint it out. You'll see that I'm kind of doing it in segments. Typically, that's going to do better than me doing one of these. I'm just holding it across. A, like I don't have to be nearly as precise if I'm kind of taking it in little chunks. And B, I'm asking that computer to process just the area that I'm working in. It tends to make the computer run faster, and it makes me not have to work so hard. If I do it on one stroke and then there's a mistake, if I Command or Control Z, I undid everything I did. If I do it in pieces, I'm only undoing the last little piece that I did. Cool. Make sense? Cool. And if I wanted to undo any of this, I'm just holding down Option there to kind of zoom out. If I want to do any of this, just Command Z. For those of us that have been around Photoshop for a while, the days of Shift Command Z are over. Because it used to be that Command Z only undid the last thing you did. It undid and redid. So just straight Command Z will step you backwards if you're on a current version of Photoshop. We got with the times. I was excited. All right, cool. Yes?
So you said previously we had to select something that we want to copy or paintbrush, right? Right now it's automated, so it's just choosing part of the
With the spot healing brush tool, yes.
So what kind of part of the image does it use it? Like, is it random? Because right now I'm trying to cut out a person, and yes, after a few tries I can do it. But what part of image does it take?
So it's looking for. So that's a great question. So it's looking for, whenever we're healing stuff, we typically want to use healing on something where we have a relatively large surface. So like if you're trying to heal, like we're going to start healing blemishes on a face here in a second. Typically, like large surfaces are going to work better with the spot healing brush tool because it has more that are light colors for it to manipulate and kind of find patterns for. If there's a lot of sporadic stuff, the healing brush tool may not be the best tool for that. So great for removing a cup that's in a field of grass, and maybe not. Yeah, great for removing an airplane out of the sky. These are really good applications for that. So something where it's nice broad brush strokes and there's lots of content to work with is typically where it's going to excel. There are definitely other methods. This is just an easy one that's really that's simple to do. Cool, great question. Sweet. So now, if I made a mistake here and I wanted to go back and that mistake was a while ago, I have to undo everything that I just did because what I'm doing right now with the spot healing brush tool is destructive. it is overwriting on the image itself. There is a way to work non-destructively. That's how I prefer to do it, and I'm going to show you that right now. Cool. We're still using the same method. We're just adding an extra bit here. So here's a picture. All right, awesome. So what I want to do here, I want to do a little bit of spot healing on his face. I want to remove this entrance sign right here. If I zoom in over here, a little bit too tight, there's this like little door sign that I want to get rid of. And then I'm looking to get rid of this guy right here. So what I'm going to do, I could absolutely just start using the spot healing brush straight away, but what I'm going to do instead is use what Photoshop has to offer, and I'm going to use some layers to help me out. So down here on the bottom right hand side, and I'll zoom in, we're going to find these guys right here. These are great ways to kind of create new content. What I'm looking to do is I want to create a new layer. That layer will sit, I'll zoom out real quick and undo so you can kind of see how that works. So I'm going to go ahead and hit that new layer button. It creates a layer on top, right? So then I want to use my spot healing brush. And then one thing that's really important, when I'm using the spot healing brush on a separate layer, one that's not the same photo, I want to make sure that sample all layers is on. That way that spot healing brush is looking at all the layers beneath it to help construct what it's trying to fix. That's on by default, not something you have to mess with, but if it's not working, that's the first place I look. Okay, so real quick, I'm not a big fan of like porcelain face, is what I call it. Like, so like photoshopping a face to death. So like I'm just looking to get rid of like the obvious blemishes. You can totally get really in depth with it and make their skin like super smooth. Not my style, not what I'm going to do here. But I have the healing brush tool on still. Use the bracket key, paint a little bit, paint, come over here. And so I'm just using the space bar to kind of move around, remove stuff, real easy. And then I'm just gonna bracket down to change the size of this. So kind of go through, kind of clean it up. And then that looks pretty good. I'm gonna take a look at his jacket real quick. Like I said, the cool thing is like I'm not adjusting anything other than brush size here. So I'm gonna go ahead and zoom in right here. This jacket has a little bit of a blemish there. It's like I did this earlier. So I'm just gonna go through, kind of work out that little used jacket look, because we're trying to sell this as a new jacket. So then come over here, and then real easy, I'm gonna come over here, make my brush a little bit bigger. You notice this is a pretty big like area with kind of the same color space. So I'm not too concerned about just scraping through. Removes it pretty easily. Go through, clean up, I'll zoom in. That looks pretty good. Come over here down to this door. And again, the spot healing brush tool works best when it has a lot of like colors that you want to exist to sample off of. Not bad. And come over here. And boom. Cool. So we essentially did the exact same thing. The benefit that I have though is that if I made a mistake, or if I decide, nah, I really don't want this, I really don't want any of the healing that I did, I can hide the layer with a little eyeball. You'll see all that content came back, and if I shift it, you'll literally see what happened. We literally just painted the fixes on a new layer. So I can go through and use the eraser tool and just erase the things that I want to bring back. So let's say that I really wanted that entrance sign back. I can make sure that my layer is selected, and then I'm going to go over to my eraser. And then this is a brush too. A brush, we're just changing the size of the eraser. And then paint it back in. Real simple. So we want to work, in Photoshop, we have the luxury in most cases to work non-destructively, and we want to. Because when we save this document, we can come back a year later and fix a problem that we saw arise, right? If we don't do that and we work destructively, we have to refine the image, and it's not hurting the initial image unless we save over it. But we have to go find that image, import it in, and then redo our entire process. We want to avoid that as often as possible. It's one of the reasons why we use Photoshop at all, is because we have that flexibility. Cool. Making sense? Sweet. All right. So next we're going to talk about removing objects and how Content Aware works. And there's been some updates to Content Aware. If you haven't used it in a while, it's really cool. I like it a lot, and it's pretty easy. So our goal here, and I always like to define a goal whenever we go into, like, when you Photoshop something, since it's a verb now, we want to kind of decide what it is we want to Photoshop. So what I want to do is I want to remove this little pathway here, because it's interrupting this serene natural beauty, I suppose. All right. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to my tools over here, and on the left-hand side, I have a bunch of different options to do selections. Selections are another really powerful tool in Photoshop that allows us just kind of pick the things that we want to work with. So a lasso tool can make selections. This marquee tool up here can make a selection. So if I just want to select a box, I literally click and drag out the box. The little ants running around tell me what I have selected. I can use this lasso tool instead and draw what I want, kind of freehand. If you got good freehand, that's great. But I'm going to go ahead and let the computer help me out a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and so to deselect, I can click away from here. The keyboard command to deselect stuff is Command or Control and D. Control on a Windows machine. So I'm going to go ahead and use instead this quick selection tool, which basically is going to allow me to just paint what I want. And you'll see it kind of runs the lines and helps me out, which I like. I want to grab the bottom of this. Looking to get rid of this whole entire thing, so I want to make sure that's selected. So whenever we want to manipulate a specific piece, we typically want to select it first. So selection's made. Now, what we're going to do here is take advantage of content-aware fill. Content-aware fill is going to do is it's going to pull out the selection that I have and then replace it with the content around it, because it's aware of what's around there and it'll kind of build for us. So to do that, I'm going to select it. I'm going to go to the Edit menu. This is one of the few times where we go to the Edit menu for this, and there's a reason why we do it, and I'll show you why in a second. How many of us have used content-aware before? Okay, so if we come over here, one of the neat things about newer versions of Photoshop is that I get a live preview before I make any changes. It used to be, back in the Stone Age, we had to hit the button to content-aware and then pray for rain. Now we can see what it's going to give us. So, brings up this kind of side-by-side view. Like most panels in here, I can click and drag to kind of resize this. So we'll see it does an okay job, but clearly we missed some stuff. So how do we alleviate that? On the left-hand side, it's showing us a couple things. The section that is selected is what we're looking to replace. The selection that is green is the content that it's using to build the fill in. Okay, so we can use this paintbrush to add more content. So if it's not looking at a section that we want it to look at, we can paint that in. But what I want to do is I want to tell it to get rid of more, because really what's happening here is that the edges are still sticking. So I'm going to use the lasso tool and just quickly wrap around it. And I will say this is not necessarily a perfect science. Content aware basically cycles every time that we do it. So if it's not perfect, we run it again. So, and we'll see. Looks pretty good. You can see on the right-hand side how it built out the content there. I'm relatively satisfied. How do you guys feel? Cool. So, in this menu, we have a bunch of different options over here. We can control opacity if we want to. I'm going to leave everything the same because this is what I want. I'm just going to hit OK down here to commit that change. So this is a destructive edit, and I'm fine with that because I didn't want that thing in the first place. Just making sure that you're aware. If you're worried about it being destructive, you could absolutely duplicate the layer. Just have a layer on top of a layer, and then just use the content aware fill so you're not disrupting the initial one. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. Cool. Sweet. And then, what's there for me? That looks all right. Cool. So, good to go here. Now, because it's destructive, what content aware does when we use this menu is that it duplicates the layer and does exactly what I just said. So I literally just hide it and it comes back. So saves you a step. That's why we want to go to that edit menu in content aware as opposed to using a content aware tool directly. We just have a little bit more control, and it creates a layer for us to work in that doesn't hurt the initial image. Cool. Making sense? How we feeling? Halfway home. Awesome. Cool. All right. So that's content aware fill. And again, you select what you want under edit, content aware fill. And if it's not available to you, that's because we have no selection made, or we're selecting on a layer that doesn't have content on it. So make sure that with any of these things, whether you're selecting or painting or anything, that you have the proper layer selected. This is going to be really important when we start talking about about adjustment layers and masks. Cool. All right. How are we feeling? Sweet. Okay. So you can absolutely combine these techniques. I'll try and do that real quick right now. Sweet. So what I'm going to do here, have this picture of my sister here on a hike. I think that was Mount Lemon. That looks Mount Lemony, right? So basically, a couple things I want to clean up. Again, I tend to take a look at the image first to kind of figure out what it is I want to do, because really, Photoshop is a task-based software. Like it's built to help you complete a task. Typically, you're not photoshopping something. Like you're trying to remove something. You're trying to enhance something. So I'm looking at the image. I've pre-looked at this. I want to get rid of those things right there. I want to get rid of this cup. And as nice as these people were, I'd like to get rid of them. Cool. So those are my tasks. So just to show you that you can combine concepts together, take advantage of stuff, I'm going to go ahead and use content aware fill to try and get rid of these folks. So using my quick selection tool here, I'm going to quickly adjust my brush size with brackets. Zoom in a little bit. So he does a pretty good job kind of wrapping around them. And I'm okay with this going a little bit out because I know that Content Aware wants to build something around this. So I'm okay grabbing the space in between two. Cool. All right. Not too much. So with a lot of these brushes, when you're painting in with these selection tools, the way to remove stuff. So I have this really big selection over here that I didn't want. If I hold down the Option or Alt key, it's a little hard to see, so let me zoom in a little bit. So see how this is a plus? If I hold down the Option or Alt key, it turns into a minus. So that means I'm going to remove stuff. So I want to kind of remove this. And changing my brush size will kind of change what they call the tolerance, or kind of how hard it's trying to adjust for us automatically, because it's looking for lines and patterns. Just kind of helps tighten it up a little bit. Makes my life a little bit easier. Bracket down, add a little bit back. Cool, that works for me. All right. Cool. And then, awesome. So then we're going to come up here, go to Edit, Content Aware Fill. Take a look at what it did. Not bad. But if I look over here, I can still see a little bit of like a halo right there of these guys. So I'm going to go ahead and use that lasso tool again to just roughly cut right here. You'll see it just kind of adds. All right. So then maybe a little tighter. Cool. And then come over here. Actually, that looks all right, but we'll just add a little bit more. You'll see it kind of recalculates every time. Yeah. Cool. So I feel okay with that, but we can manipulate it more. Let's try this. Let's make that any more convincing. All right. I mentioned that it's not a perfect science, correct? So it is one of those things you gotta play with, and it's one of those where you kind of gotta ride the line. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. So I think that's good enough. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit OK. It's gonna commit that change. It has it on a new layer for me, which is great. If you knew like the visual landmarks, that might be a problem, but we don't in this instance, so we're gonna be okay. So now this is selected, right? I'm gonna go ahead and deselect it. So keyboard command or Control D will deselect any selection that you have. And then on this new background layer, because it's already a new layer that's on top, I can go ahead and start spot heal brushing right on this layer, so that everything's kind of in one. All of my adjustments are kind of in a single layer. So I'm gonna come over to the spot healing brush tool. Zoom in a little bit. Let's get rid of that cup. I'm just gonna kind of paint around it. Not bad. Come over here, adjust the size of my paintbrush, and then work on getting rid of whatever that is. Kind of clean that up. I didn't mind those too much, but I don't miss them. And then when I zoom out, by the way, if you're zoomed into something really tight and you want to zoom out really fast, Command on a Mac, Control on a Windows machine, and 0 will make your picture fit the frame. make the picture fit your window. So, looks pretty good. There's our before, there's our after. I'm not complaining too much. Cool. Sweet. How are we feeling about that? You can kind of combine multiple instances together to kind of create what it is that you want. So typically Photoshop is a series of tools that we use in sequence, not necessarily an individual tool. I want to show you can kind of combine techniques here and use both of them in different instances to get what it is you wanted out of your image. Cool. All right. In between those two things, really a lot of that healing is done. And like I said, there are things you can dive deeper into, but these are really easy, simple to use tools that are pretty powerful, that on their own have a lot of individual adjustments. Cool. All right. Feeling good? Sweet. Okay. So I'm not going to use this image, but I'll show it to you because it's really cute. I was going to show you guys how we get rid of that cooler, but honestly, it's just a content aware fill, or you do either one. It's just what makes sense for you. But that's my stepdad and his dog. His name's Hank. He's like this big now. I don't have a series of pictures. Maybe we'll do that next time. Just make a series of pictures of Hank. All right, cool. All right, sweet. So feeling good about healing? Cool. We talked about healing. We talked about making new layers and things like that. Now, one of the things that we want to talk about whenever we're manipulating photos is masks. That is one of the other main reasons why we use Photoshop. Just the ability to mask things out that we don't want. We're gonna start really basic. Show you what a mask is, show you how to manipulate it, and then we will work our way up to using masks and color adjustments together to take an image that's already pretty good and make it great. Cool. Intro to masks. I don't have any of this on hand for you guys. You just got to look at it. I'm sorry. I don't have it either. So we'll grab some water real quick if that's cool. Oh, by the way, when we're done with this, I have lots of stickers and things, so feel free to come up and grab some. All right, sweet. So masks. We talked about using the eraser tool. And the eraser tool will basically erase content that's on our image, but it's destructive. I can't get that content back if I want it. If I want to be able to remove things and then add them back if I make a mistake or if I need to come back a year later, I want to use a mask. Good news is masks are really easy to apply. So what we're going to do is on our bottom right-hand side of our layers panel, and I'll zoom in so we can see it, I will find this mask button right here. This will allow me to add a layer mask. So the layer mask will be added to whatever layer I currently have selected. So select the layer you want is step one. Step two is to click that button. And if you look right here, when I click that button, you should see a little white box shows up next to it, right? So if I haven't made a selection, I'll just have a standard white box here. So basically, this is what we're going to manipulate when we want to remove content. Okay, I'm going to use a brush for this, but you could use a selection or anything you want. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the regular brush tool. Keyboard shortcut for that is B. So regular paintbrush. And then here we have our color swatches, right? So masks only understand 3 colors. Well, really 2, black and white. The variation of like blending black and white is gray. So black, white, and gray are the colors that you'll use when you manipulate a mask. So the way that it works is that black conceals, white reveals. Cool. So another way to look at that, white is going to be opaque, black is going to be transparent. So as I paint here, we'll see I'm doing that, and I'm using a black paintbrush. So if I come over here, just kind of show you, it's just a regular black paintbrush. That's just on the layer. This is how a black paintbrush behaves on a layer mask. Okay? So we want to use black on our layer mask. We want to remove stuff. So these are our swatches over here. So to make sure that we have black and white selected on our keyboard, we can just press the D key. That's going to set the default colors, black and white. To quickly switch between those two, you'll see that we have these two guys right here. That's a foreground color and a background color. To switch that background color, we're going to use X. Think of it like we're exchanging the colors. We're swapping them out. It's kind of our hot swap button for the 2 colors that we have selected. X, you'll see cycles right there. Have a little, we're zoomed in really close. Have a little, oh, too far. Let's get there. Come on, come on, come on. Here we go. So flew too close to the sun there, but hit X a bunch, we can have a little rave up here. So that's going to allow you to switch. Cool. So I'm going to go ahead and paint over here, hit X to switch to black, do this. So we talked about brushes and how we can manipulate them, right? So when we're using brushes with masks, that manipulation plays an even bigger role, because sometimes we only want to reveal like maybe some, like we're trying to kind of round off an edge. We don't want a really hard brush. And we may not want a ton of flow. So let's talk about what that looks like. I'm gonna make my brush nice and big so it's easy to see. I'm gonna come over to my brush settings right here. I have this little triangle drop down that's gonna give me all of them. I have a bunch of different brushes here that I can set, and you can use any of these that you want. Any brush works. But I'm just gonna go ahead and go with this standard soft round pressure size, or whatever you like. So I have size right here, which we talked about. You can manipulate with the brackets, right? Then I have hardness. Hardness is kind of how hard we're pressing down on the brush. You'll see it's kind of soft right there, right? The other way to control softness is with flow. So if I turn the flow way down, I'll have to kind of do multiple passes, and I'm holding it down and I'm just running it in a circle a bunch of times to make that show up, right? Kind of makes it kind of like slowly eats away at it. When you're trying to do hard corners and things like that, that can be really helpful. If I turn the flow up, you'll see that's way easier to kind of cut into it. I didn't have to hold it very long. I just click down and go. If you have like a stylus, if you have a stylus or like a Wacom tablet or something like that, or an Apple Pencil with like an application like AstroPad, those have velocity sensitivity, so that flow will be based off of how hard you're pressing down. But for us, typically I leave the flow around 50, so that I can kind of slowly cut away what I want. Not too slow though. But between those three things, I can kind of get the masking style that I want. Cool. All right. So far, so good? Sweet. So we made all these changes to this mask, and they look great here, but how do I know what exactly the mask did? I have this really little picture here, but if I hold down Option and then double click on the mask, it will show me all the changes that I made. So you can literally see I was just scribbling with brushes. You can see the different brushes. This one right here is more of a hard brush. This one right here was that flow really low. This one right here was that flow really high. And I have a rounded brush, so it has soft edges. If I switch to a hard brush, which I'll do right now, hard, we'll see that even with that flow really low, if I hold down Option and click, you'll see that the edges are really hard, even though the flow wasn't very high. If the flow was higher, see how there's kind of like these like little like circles on top of circles kind of present? That's because that edge is really hard. If I had the flow up all the way and the pressure up all the way, it would just be like I'm stamping almost. Cool. Making sense? Sweet. So it's one of those, like if you've ever been in a math class before and they make you do it the long way and then show you the easy way and then show you why it works. We just did that. Cool. All right. So, and then Option click to get rid of the mask. That's also really cool when you cut somebody out and you have them in a layer mask. You can kind of see the cutout that you made. Which is kind of fun. All right. So now we're going to talk about using layer masks artistically. So right here I have this forest, and then I also have another layer underneath. Looks like this. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a layer mask along with brushes and flow to hopefully make it look like the waterfall is running out of this tree, because we're fancy. All right, sweet. So real easy to do. Basically just going to do what I told you. We're just going to be a little bit more deliberate about it. So we're going to add a layer mask, which is this button down here. Make sure the layer mask is selected. That's super important. If I don't do that, then I'll be painting on whatever layer I have selected. And I don't want black on my image. I want to remove content from it. So come over here. I'm going to go ahead and go back to that soft round brush. I'm going to go ahead and increase my flow to like 20. 12's good. All right, cool. And then literally, I'm just going to adjust my brush size and then just kind of start slowly cutting away. And we'll see if I do that right. We kind of slowly start revealing. We have this whole Narnia thing going out of the tree there. Really easy to do. Didn't take a ton of effort. I argue that we have something that looks pretty cool, and I spent about 7 seconds. So this is why we use masks. We can kind of manipulate this stuff really quickly. If I made a mistake, all I have to do is press X and then paint back in. So kind of bring it down. Maybe I want that instead. And I can kind of press X over and over again to kind of switch back and forth in between them. There we go. That's more what I want. Cool. And we're done. We're ready to post to DeviantArt. Awesome. Cool. Making sense? Sweet. We're rounding the corner here, guys. How are we feeling? All right. You feel like you got something out of this? I hope so. Awesome. Cool. All righty. So the last thing I want to talk about, and it's probably the one of the more complex things that I want to talk about, is adjustment layers. So there are a bunch of different ways to edit your image. If you go under Edit, there's a bunch of stuff there. If you go under Image, there's Adjustments, and these types of things. So we can add hue, saturation. Have any of us heard of that before? Hue and saturation. If you've edited a photo on your phone, you've seen a lot of these things before. So that's a nice thing. There's already terminology that you're aware of. Color balance, black and white, photo filter, all of these different types of things. And this is a way to access that menu. It is not my preferred way. So I'll show you how I prefer to do it and what I think is pretty handy. So what I want to do here is I want to go ahead and come down to where we found that mask section, and then to the right of the mask section, you will find your adjustment layers. So everything that we saw right there, along with being able to add gradients and all those other things. So I'm going to come down here, and then I'm going to add a hue and saturation adjustment layer. Cool. And we'll see, shows up with a mask. That's why I go there, because I get a mask. And and I like using masks quite a bit. We can see right here on the sunset, we have some kind of dynamic colors going. Let me go ahead and Command 0 here, or Control 0. All right, sweet. So this is the whole image. We have a lot of dynamic colors going. We have some really dark areas at the bottom. We have some really light areas at the top. We have this kind of really cool ray of sunshine on the sunset. But what I want to do is I want to intensify some of the colors a bit. So I'm going to go ahead and we have hue and saturation. We were talking earlier about how the properties panel adjusts based off what we have selected. This is what it looks like with a background layer. This is what it looks like with a adjustment layer. So we're looking right in this section right here. So I can adjust hue. I have number values that I can move. I can also slide this so you kind of get crazy colors going. Want this to be like Hulk colors, we could do there. And then roll through. Kind of cool. I'm going to go ahead and set this back to 0. I just want to show you that you could do it. So you want this to look like a 90s music video? That's where we start. All right, sweet. So we have saturation, right? So saturation is the intensity of color. If I slide it all the way to the left, no color, right? Slide all the way to the right, really vibrant colors. Now, I'm kind of blowing it out a la 90s music video. But I'm going to go and pull that back a little bit. I'm going to leave it a little bit more exaggerated than I actually do it. When I'm dealing with adjustments, typically it's a salt and pepper idea, like we're seasoning, typically. But again, I tend to use Photoshop to do a little bit of augmentation. I don't go crazy with that type of stuff. So this works well for me. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit because I think it's a little bit easier to see. All right, sweet. So I think the sky looks good, but I really lost some of the, this got way darker than I wanted it to be. So how do I adjust this and still keep this? Lots of different ways to do it. We could use the brush method that we talked about before, but typically when we're dealing with a full image, what I want to do is I want to ramp people, I want to ramp you into the effect, or I want to ramp the effect in or the effect out. So for that, I'm going to use the gradient tool. Have you guys ever seen gradients before? It's transitioning from one color to another color. Because we're on a mask, we want a black and white gradient. So over here, we have the gradient tool. Creates a gradual blend between colors. That's a really good way to explain it. I'm glad they wrote it. All right, sweet. So G is the command for that. I want to make sure that my layer mask is selected. And then up here, I have my gradient controls, and I have a lot of different color gradients. So I can go through and manipulate them. But what I want is this first one right here. So it's black with a nice like ramp into white. So I'm going to select that. I see a little visual indicator that's selected. I want to make sure that I'm on my mask. And then I'm going to go ahead and click and drag, and we can see what it does. So, option click. So that's where we were at. Okay, so basically it's hiding at the bottom, and then it's kind of gradually going up as we go to the top. Okay, So I'm going to go ahead and option click again, and then and then I may want that ramp a little bit more dramatic. So I will adjust it, and I'll go ahead and come here and crank this up a little bit so it's a little bit easier to see the difference. But basically, when I do this gradient thing, see how like I got a bunch of detail back, but I still have the super saturated look at the top. Like I said, this is something that you'll want to kind of go through a couple times and do. So you'll see I'm just doing from bottom to top here, just kind of regular gradients. I'm holding down the shift key to make sure that I'm moving completely horizontally. But if I wanted to move it a diagonal, all I got to do is move that way. And you'll see you can kind of get some cool transitioning effects by doing that too. So there's no real hard and fast rule on how to use a gradient or like what makes sense for you. It's what makes sense for the image. So I'm going to go ahead and do one of those. That looks pretty good to me. Okay, so now I'm going to add another adjustment layer. An adjustment layer, and I'm going to go with let's do a brightness and contrast adjustment layer. So adjustment layers work just like any other layer you have. They stack. So the thing on the top is going to be the thing that it's manipulated last. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust this contrast right here. So again, I have kind of like, as I adjust this contrast and this brightness, and brightness is going to be the overall like lightness of the image. Basically, as we slide to the right, we're adding more white to our pixels. As we slide to the left, we're adding more black, or removing that white. Okay, so I have this right here. Pretty happy with it. And then, so I like what it's doing, because I'm going for something a little dramatic here. I like what it's doing to the waves. I don't like what it's doing to the ocean. I don't like what it's doing to the sky. So I literally just do the opposite thing. Make sure the layer's selected, select the gradient tool, click on black and white gradient, and then just go from the top down. Yep. And I can get kind of right on that line if I wanted to adjust a little bit more gradually. But this is what we started with. And then we have that for the sky. We have that for the waves. And now we have kind of a completed image here. I could add another one. So like, let's say that I wanted, if you wanted this to ramp into color, you could do the same thing with the black and white filter and just ramp it in. Actually, let's do that for fun. All right, sweet. So one more time. Whoops, masks on masks. So we're gonna go black and white. Cool. So I have this black and white thing, and then with black and white, we're not just dealing with black and white. As we adjust this, it will kind of adjust the different colors here. We have presets to help us out. So let's say that's kind of what I'm going for. And these presets can be really helpful. So, ooh. All right, cool. All right. And we'll just go with blue filter. Cool, that looks sort of normal. All right, so now I'm gonna go ahead and take my gradient tool. We can drag it down. So I'm going for like this style of effect. I can do that. Opposite way does this. And let's say that's really cool, but it's too intense, right? So we can adjust the opacity of that layer too, to make it a little bit more transparent. So then, starting from the bottom, that's where we started, added some saturation, omitted the bottom, added some contrast, omitted the top, and then just kind of an overall look, and then there we go. Cool. So, how are we feeling so far? Question? Yeah, so it won't do anything. Because we're working with a mask, we need black and white. Those are the only colors that register when we're dealing with a mask. If we were to take a regular gradient and just apply it, it's actually not a bad question. So if I were to take this red one, just apply it, we can't use it here, but what it would do, and I'm just gonna do this on a new layer, is it would literally, this is what gradients do. Yeah, so basically we just have white on one side, black on the other side, and we're just doing that. And you can go into your settings and manipulate them, for sure. Great, that was a good question. Awesome. Well, how we feeling? Did we learn something? Awesome. Cool. So isn't the end of the conversation. I just want to kind of give you guys some places to get started. Do we feel like we have a better idea of interface and where to look for stuff? Really, when you're getting into Photoshop, that's the biggest thing. It's just where do we start looking for things? We talked about brushes and kind of how to manipulate those. Really, that's a lot of what this workshop was brush manipulation. We talked about spot healing and how we can use that to clean up stuff. We talked about masks and how we can manipulate those. We also talked about adjustment layers and how to adjust those. Content aware tool, remember that's under edit, and content aware, that won't show up until you select something though. So use those selection tools like the lasso or the quick selection tool to select your objects, and then you will have access to the content aware tool. Okay, and then we talked about how we can combine those, had some fun with some masks here. Then we creatively made our profile picture for whatever platform we want, put ourselves in there going, we're good to go. And then we talked about using adjustment layers on and masks together to stylize a photo.